So, for my informative speech today, I'm going to be informing you about the Battle of the Bulge and how it greatly affected the outcome of World War II. Three quick topics we're going to go over is how and where it started, how it affected the outcome of the war, and how it affected the German army because of their loss. So, we'll start off with where it began at. On your right here you have all of the German occupied countries. Any land that was controlled by Germany would fall under this section right here. This black solid line is the initial front between the American Allied forces and the German forces. This dotted line that surrounds this yellow region all makes up American occupied and controlled territories. There's a small town around the southwest corner of the American occupied forces called Bastogne, and we'll get to that later on. But Bastogne, as we'll see, played a key role in how the outcome of this war went. The location of this battle was in the southwest corner of Belgium, which is up here, and was separated Belgium from Luxembourg, and it was mainly contained in the Ardennes forest. The reason for the battle was the German army at this time was heavily outnumbered, and they needed to make one final push against the American forces. At this point it was December of 1944. So Adolf Hitler devised a plan that would capitalize on the American overconfidence of their abilities, the poor weather, because they were currently experiencing the worst winter in over 100 years, and the statistical advantage that they had over the Americans based on army size at that time in that area, as well as equipment, troops, and machinery. It was called the Battle of the Bulge because, as we can see from this line, Germany was able to penetrate up to 60 miles in some cases, or in some places, 60 miles into the American-controlled territories towards Bastogne. Now, going back to Bastogne, Bastogne was a major offensive position because it was a four-way crossroads that could control traffic to Belgium, Luxembourg, east towards another town called Antwerp, which controlled all of the shipping and sea trade that came in to supply the Allied forces, as well as the other crossroad that went back into Germany to where they could go get their own supplies again. Now we'll go to how the initial German success later transferred to initial defeat. So the initial German success was mainly due to how far they could penetrate because of the Allied forces' overconfidence in their abilities. The Allied forces at this point in the war had concentrated all of their effort towards Russia and were believing that Germany would put up a defensive attack, not a offensive attack. So they had their line stretched extremely thin in some areas. As the Germans advanced inward, the Americans started to panic. And when they panicked, the line broke through, and German forces were able to penetrate, which is what these red arrows symbolize, were able to penetrate all over the area. Now, on December 18th, the weather broke. So 2 days into this battle, on December 18th, 1944, the heavy cloud cover and the cold conditions broke a little bit. And what that allowed the Americans to do was to put more planes in the air, to do more reconnaissance, and the Germans were also stuck in one position. They were still banking on the fact that the weather was going to hold, that they weren't going to have any issues with American reconnaissance. So they were all centralized in one location. But when that weather broke, the Americans were able to put planes in the air, to put artillery into that area, and were able to effectively eliminate a good portion of the German army. Because of this, the Germans didn't have the manpower or the machinery to reach Bastogne. Now, because they couldn't reach Bastogne, they couldn't secure essentially all of the American occupied area. And they were also unable to secure the roads that led to Antwerp. So without being able to secure Antwerp, they couldn't secure any supplies that came into Belgium and Luxembourg. And by not securing Bastogne, they weren't able to get a way to go back into their own area to get their own supplies. So they could not only cut off supplies to the opponent, but they also couldn't get their own supplies. So at this point, the battle starts to swing into the American Allied forces' favor. Even though they were outnumbered in artillery, they made up for it in manpower. So just by manpower alone, at this point, they were able to overtake the German forces and the German offensive move that was put against them. And now we'll look at how it defeated how this outcome defeated the German army. The main event that turned it against the Germans and contributed to their defeat was the weather break, because with that weather break, the Americans were able to regroup and re-strategize and figure out how they were going to contribute to defeating the army. At this point, this battle alone was the largest land battle of World War II. Over 120,000 Germans were lost, and over 80,000 men for the American side were lost. Now that's not including machinery, equipment, tanks, artillery. That's just manpower alone, which is a pretty astonishing number. The effect that it had on the German army was greater than the effect that the American and the Allied forces experienced. And the reason I say that is the German army at this point could no longer rally themselves. They had exhausted all their options at this point. They had lost a good deal, or a good number of men, not just from this battle alone, but all the previous battles contributed to. And they just couldn't get the German population to stand behind them at this point. The German population realized this is probably a losing cause, and we're going downhill fast. The Americans, on the other hand, saw it as an opportunity to regroup and say, okay, we just repelled a giant attack when we were outnumbered in artillery, and we made up for it in just manpower alone. And this helped the American cause for two main reasons. One of them was it prevented another German advance. Like I said earlier, the Germans had exhausted all their options, so they could no longer advance their position. They could no longer launch a large-scale attack. The second reason helped was the Allies did not become divided. They didn't become divided between Great Britain and America. They didn't have to sign separate peace treaties, and they were able to maintain their alliance with Russia. And that was crucial too, because if they had become divided, they wouldn't be able to rely on each other for support in this area, let alone in the Russian sector. So overall, this battle significantly contributed to the Americans winning the war. Because had the Americans not won this battle, Germany could have dragged the war on. They could have created more large-scale attacks. They could have done both offensive and defensive attacks and kind of drawn it out to a stalemate. But overall, the Americans still had the willpower, the machinery, the men, the equipment, and would have still prevailed, even with the German attack. But the German attack, had it been successful, would have created a lot of different opportunities for the Germans and would have created a lot of headaches for the American troops. So, with that being said, are there any questions or anything like that? Nope. Alrighty.